Hello and welcome to my combat level named the Greenhouse Attack. In this video I want to talk about the general level flow, the combat encounters and the overall mission structure. To start this all off, I want to talk about the general mission structure. The whole mission being divided into two parts, one more focused on introduction and exploration, with the last part of the level being focused on combat, and the second part of the mission being fully focused on combat and heightens the tension for the player until the last fight. To give you an idea about what the mission is about, here's a short summary over the general mission narrative. You, a secret military agent, need to get information from another agent that is based in the Bloomhaven Sanctuary where the mission is based in. When you get to the base, you enter the base and you find out he isn't there. He is at the local communications tower. When you're making your way to the communications tower because you need to get the information, you get a message that he's being attacked by the enemy. When you get to the attack, you defeat the enemies, you get the information, but then you see the Bloomhaven Sanctuary being on fire. They are currently attacking the Bloomhaven Sanctuary. You need to get back there and you need to save the sanctuary before it gets destroyed. So yes, that's the whole narrative of this mission. My main focus around this project was the combat encounters, which I have 4 of. The first one being the surprise attack on the communications tower, and the 3 others being on the way back to saving the Bloomhaven Sanctuary. And these combat encounters are the street, the ditch, the flood, and the camp. The street being the first one with the communications tower, and the camp being the last one when you're at the Bloomhaven Sanctuary trying to take it back from the enemies. I have divided this presentation into 7 unique parts, each part representing a unique part of the mission. Part 1, the level introduction. You start the experience outside the Bloomhaven Sanctuary with the communications tower right in front of you. When entering the sanctuary, you get the twist that the agent you were supposed to meet isn't there anymore. You need to get the key and get out and get to the communications tower. Now the goal switches from the sanctuary and the agent to the communications tower. The main purpose of this part is to give the player the real mission, introduce the environment to the player, mainly because the environment will be a later combat space, familiarizing the player with the space before the combat even begins. With this, I'm going to the second part, the exploration and the first call to action. After exiting Sanctuary ground, you need to explore and find your way to the communications tower, but then you find out the communications tower is under attack and you need to get there quickly. My approach to this space is similar to the first space, giving the player environmental context and a mental map that they can rely on later when this turns to a combat space. The third part is the first combat. This is where you as the player first engage with a small combat encounter designed to involve the player in combat before the main big combat encounter happens. After that, you move on to the main combat encounter of this area. The goal with this combat encounter is to first let the player play an offensive role in the combat by attacking the enemies trying to take over the communications tower, then switching the player's role to a more defensive minded role, needing to defend the communications tower from waves of enemies. I did this by focusing on the main and flanking lanes of the combat, as well as working with cover layers to always give the players an option and always having lanes to run in. This was my general design philosophy when designing this combat space and also the other combat spaces in this mission. Moving on to part 4 with the twist. You are now moving up the building, but when you reach the top, the Bloomhaven Sanctuary looks like it's in flames. It has been attacked and you need to get there quickly. This crazy Ivan overlooking the whole space you have just been traversing, and this is the reason why the player urgency to get back to the Bloomhaven Sanctuary is so strong. This is also where the mission's intensity shift starts. From this point on, the intensity of the mission will only increase, with the new main goal being getting back to the Bloomhaven Sanctuary. This takes us to the largest part of the mission. Part 5, the way back. Starting this part off, we have the breathing space between the twist and the coming combat encounter. After navigating the ditches, we get to the second combat encounter, the ditch. The ditch is a small combat encounter, mainly focusing on the identity of the paths and overall traversal. After clearing the ditch, you have a small breathing space in between the ditch and the flood. In the flood combat space, my main design philosophy were pinning the player in a set position with enemies coming in waves against the player. The first two waves are designed to pin the player down to that set position. After that, the waves appear further and further back in the combat space, getting the player eager to push into the space, pushing back the enemy, giving the player a sense of progression combined with also moving closer and closer to the Bloomhaven Sanctuary. This takes us to the second to last part, the ending and climax. In this combat space, my main focus was for the player to be able to push through waves of enemies, getting closer and closer to the building for each wave. Finally entering the building reveals that there are enemies inside the building as well, needing the player to push through the enemies inside until they reach the main safe zone, ending the mission. One of my main focuses that isn't combat related is the player guidance. Guiding the player throughout the experience with the main goals always being close to frame or in frame at all times, with a few areas hiding the main goal to prevent visual fatigue, but still keeping the up-tempo environment of the general mission. More on all of this will be written down below. Thank you for watching my presentation on my piece, The Greenhouse Attack.